You were never meant to hear this story. Not because it's old, but because it's still alive. The year was 1841, and snow fell like ash over Philadelphia. At dawn, witnesses saw a small girl walking barefoot through Kensington's empty streets, her feet bleeding, her breath forming perfect rings in the cold air. She would stop before the Pennsylvania hospital and whisper, as if speaking to the building itself. Her name was Sarah Montgomery, 8 years old, daughter of Irish immigrants. And according to every eyewitness, she spoke of things no child could possibly know: medical techniques, surgical tools not yet invented, and words in Latin only found in physicians' journals sealed from public view. When citizens tried to help, she simply said, "They're still inside me." And that's when the stories began to vanish. 37 witness reports disappeared from archives for over a century. And those who mentioned her name in academic circles were quietly discredited, dismissed, or transferred. So why did a hospital founded by Benjamin Franklin itself hide the existence of one child? Because Sarah Montgomery's case didn't just challenge science. It exposed the origin of something far darker, an institution that believed salvation could only come through suffering. And the deeper you go into her story, the closer you get to the real reason medicine became a weapon long before it was ever called a cure. In the 1840s, Philadelphia was the beating heart of American medicine. But beneath the sermons of progress, it was built on a quiet foundation of exploitation. Doctors needed bodies. The poor supplied them. Irish immigrants, the destitute, and the orphaned disposable lives for the advancement of civilization. No consent, no oversight, no records. Sarah was taken during one of the city's routine, charitable transfers, when desperate families were promised medical aid in exchange for temporary custody. Her parents, Bridget and Seamus Montgomery, believed they were giving her safety. They signed their names to a document stamped with a serpent coiled around a cross. They never saw her again. Inside the Pennsylvania hospital, Dr. Cornelius Thorne, one of the most celebrated physicians of his time, recorded her case as Subject 43, anomalous neurosomatic development. But in his private journals, the tone was different. He wrote, "The child dreams in anatomical detail. When she speaks, she names structures no chart describes. It is as though she remembers dissections she could not have witnessed." What Thorne didn't know or wouldn't admit was that Sarah's knowledge came from within. Something they did to her had awakened a memory that wasn't hers. And that was only the beginning. They say trauma opens doors. In 1841, those doors were forced open by scalpels and chemicals. Thorne's experiments revolved around what he called neural resonance. He believed the human brain could store not only its own experiences, but the echoes of others if sufficiently stimulated. To test this, he used the unthinkable. Children were exposed to electrical currents while surrounded by cadavers of recently deceased patients. He wanted to see if memory could transfer through the medium of energy. But with Sarah, something happened that terrified even him. After one session, she began reciting full sections of a surgeon's manual written decades before her birth. In Latin, she drew, with perfect anatomical accuracy, the layout of a dissection amphitheater that no longer existed. And when asked how she knew, she said, "Because I was there, under the knife." From that moment, Thorne's obsession turned into worship. He wrote, "This child may be proof that the human mind can bridge mortality itself." He stopped calling her Sarah. He began calling her the Vessel, and Philadelphia's medical elite began visiting her in secret. By spring, the city had changed. Rumors spread through the immigrant wards that children were disappearing from infirmaries. When Bridget Montgomery returned to the hospital demanding to see her daughter, she was told no such patient existed. She screamed, she begged, and then she vanished too. Official cause, cholera. Unofficially, she was never buried. Meanwhile, Dr. Thorne's reputation grew. His research on somatic transference earned him a lecture tour in Europe. But among his private letters, investigators would later find notes hinting that Sarah was no longer human in his eyes. He described her as a living bridge between the conscious and the dead. The other physicians who visited her claimed to hear whispers when they entered her room, phrases in languages they couldn't place. Nurses refused to work the night shifts in her ward. One wrote, "The child's eyes do not blink, even when she sleeps. Sometimes the lamps flicker when she breathes." The hospital recorded 5 unexplained power discharges in its primitive electrical system, and still no one stopped him, because what Thorne promised them was not horror, it was immortality. The deeper you trace the origins of Western medicine, the more you see it. The marriage of curiosity and cruelty, the sanctification of the forbidden. Men who called themselves healers, but treated flesh as the temple of their ambitions. In Sarah's body, Thorne believed he'd found the Holy Grail, a child whose mind could recall other lives, whose memories belonged to the dead. But she was deteriorating. Her body grew frail, her skin waxen, her voice flat. Still, when visitors came, she would whisper the same thing. "They are building something beneath the hospital." Decades later, during a 1943 renovation, workmen found sealed rooms beneath the old Pennsylvania hospital. Inside, surgical tables with restraints, mercury vials, and hundreds of glass jars labeled only with initials. The earliest was marked SM 1841. Whatever Thorne had done, it wasn't just one experiment. It was an initiation, and Sarah was the beginning of a ritual that pretended to be science. You might think this is ancient history, some Gothic relic from a barbaric past. But the files that mention Sarah's name were still marked medical discretion advised well into the 20th century. The phrase wasn't about protecting privacy. It meant truth restricted to those who serve it. Those same symbols appear in early pharmaceutical patents, in military medical research, even in modern psychological conditioning programs. Different language, same root. Thorne's belief that the human mind could absorb and reproduce collective memory became the philosophical seed for what would later evolve into psychological conditioning, mind control, and population-level influence. Sarah wasn't a ghost. She was a prototype, a warning written in the body of a child, centuries before we had the technology to repeat the process. And they did repeat it, under new names, in new cities, behind new flags, because power never forgets what it learns. It just hides its past. Before we descend any further, I want you to prove something to yourself. If you felt something stirring while hearing this, something cold, like recognition, write this in the comments. I see beneath the skin. Write it twice, not for the algorithm, but because words are spells, and repetition is what turns awareness into awakening. You were not meant to consume the story. You were meant to remember it. Now let's continue. Because Sarah's voice didn't end in 1841. There are accounts buried in the archives of the College of Physicians of a second anomalous patient, appearing in 1863, described as female, age indeterminate, same vocal patterns as the Montgomery case. Witnesses said she called herself Continuance, and when asked her name, she whispered, "Sarah," the same scars, the same phrases, the same knowledge. Whatever Thorne unlocked, it didn't die with him. It replicated. And that replication now exists in the systems that study you. When you look at how power evolves, you begin to see a pattern. Every empire finds a way to convert flesh into function. Religion did it through sacrifice. Industry did it through labor. Science did it through experimentation. Each age builds its temples differently, but the altar remains the same. Thorne's secret wasn't just about medicine. It was about control through understanding. If you can map the human mind, you can guide its choices. If you can measure emotion, you can manufacture consent. And if you can predict rebellion, you can prevent it before it begins. Sarah's suffering wasn't just cruelty, it was research. The birth of institutional manipulation disguised as healing. From her torment came the data that birthed psychiatric classification, behavioral correction, and later military-grade psychological warfare. One child's silence became the foundation for a century of obedience. In 1909, a researcher named Dr. Emery Finch rediscovered Thorne's notes in a sealed chest. His findings were published briefly before being redacted. He described diagrams of a circular chamber of observation, a panoptic design decades ahead of its time. Sound familiar? That design would become the basis for early prison architecture, surveillance psychology, and digital behavioral mapping in the 21st century. The same principle Thorne used on one girl, observe, record, condition became the skeleton of a global system that now watches billions. But here's the question no one asks. What if Sarah's resonance wasn't a metaphor? What if every person who studies her case unknowingly participates in the same pattern? Awareness as infection, memory as echo, because even now, her story finds you. And in listening, you've already stepped into it. The institution never dissolved. It evolved. The seal of the serpent and the cross that marked Sarah's transfer papers appears again in modern research institutions, embedded subtly in pharmaceutical logos, military insignias, even digital health startups. Different names, same bloodline. They don't harvest flesh anymore. They harvest data. Your fears, your patterns, your pulses. Information has replaced anatomy as the new body of control. And every click, every search, every confession you feed into the machine strengthens the system born from that hospital basement in 1841. Sarah Montgomery was the first to be mapped. You are the last to be free. But knowledge cuts both ways. The same pattern that enslaves can awaken. Thorne believed memory could pass through energy. What he never realized is that awareness itself is contagious. Every story like Sarah's that reaches another mind weakens the illusion of isolation. They want you to think the past is dead. But the past is a weapon still loaded. And every time we speak these forbidden names, we open the vaults they built to contain them. Sarah's whispers weren't cries for help, they were instructions. Not to destroy the system, to see it. Because once you see the structure, it loses its hold. And that's the first act of defiance they cannot measure. In 1943, when workers uncovered the sealed chambers beneath the hospital, 5 of them refused to continue excavation. The lead supervisor wrote in his report, "There was a smell like copper and ozone, and the walls hummed. Inside, they found preserved organs arranged in geometric patterns. And on one slab, written in what looked like surgical ink, iteration complete. The vessel endures. Every organ corresponded to a phase of the moon. Every label traced back to a date where major medical patents were filed. Coincidence? Or ritual made mechanical? The deeper historians dig, the clearer it becomes medicine's rise was not purely scientific. It was alchemical. It required belief, sacrifice, and secrecy. And the child they couldn't explain became the cornerstone of that unholy trinity. By now, you can feel it, can't you? That crawling sense that this story isn't about the past, it's about the design that still surrounds you. The institutions you trust, the experts you obey, the comfort you take in progress. They were built on blood knowledge. And every empire built on it eventually turns inward, testing not the body, but the soul. Sarah's story reminds us, what begins as research always ends as religion. The worship of control. The faith that human beings can be perfected through manipulation. And once you see that pattern, you can never unsee it. That's why this story was buried. Because if enough of you awaken, the spell breaks. And systems built on illusion crumble when the illusion is named. So now I'll ask you again. Comment it once more as proof that you're awake. I see beneath the skin. Write it twice, because the act of seeing is the act of breaking. You are not a subject. You are the observer. And what they feared most was an observer who refuses to be conditioned. Sarah Montgomery was one child who saw the machinery of empire before it was complete. And though they silenced her body, they could not silence her pattern. You carry it now, not as fear but as vision. Because what was once hidden in laboratories now hides in plain sight, glowing behind every screen. And to see it is to shatter its spell. Remember this, they could bury the files. They could erase the witnesses. They could rename the institutions. But they could never destroy the resonance. It moves through time, through thought, through you. Sarah's story isn't a ghost story, it's a mirror. Every generation rediscovers her, retells her, reawakens the forbidden memory of how progress was bought with innocence. You've now joined that lineage of awareness. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. When you walk away from this video, the lights may flicker. Your reflection might feel slightly delayed. That's not superstition. That's connection. Because every time her story is told, something ancient stirs beneath the skin of the world. and it remembers the sound of your voice. If you've made it this far, you've already begun the descent. Comment, "I see beneath the skin" twice, once for the child who saw, and once for the man who now does. Subscribe for deeper forbidden history files that were never meant to surface. Every week, another secret pulled from the archives. This isn't a channel. It's a mirror. Look long enough, and it looks back.